Hello, this is John Keel with the Engine Room and bringing back the truth and sanctity of our 12-step here. The Engine Room was created in May of 2015 out of the necessary need that I felt vibration in the 12-step rooms could be of a higher vibration, a higher energy. So with that, I went to the with the Intergroup office in Austin, Texas, and registered the Engine Room with the Alcoholics Anonymous, the offices, the general service offices in New York City. One can check out the archives going back to May of 15 through Facebook, John Keel, the Engine Room. I'd like to make note of the representation of the gorilla that up out of his head is his consciousness rising, that he's sinking into the music, the vibe, that the grimace on his face might represent his determination and knowing that he'd been held down too long, injustices, what have you, but through practicing spiritual principle as forgiveness and patience and tolerance, he is a work in progress, as we all are, and that's why they call it work. So with that, we will proceed, and I will try to bring it all together in how it used to be, the true intent of the practicing spiritual principles laid at our feet, and we practice those in all our affairs to come up and, they say, spiritual awakening. It's a spiritual experience in awakening, otherwise known as self-realization, or in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self-actualization, where one realizes their true potential within them, the answer, the power comes from with them through practicing these spiritual principles of natural law in being of moral servitude for our fellows, our fellow sisters and brothers, that we can come up in higher consciousness in having our focus and intent in doing the good things, giving, expecting nothing in return. And as the serpent represents on the rod of Asclepius in this star of life, which is seen on our medical professionals' vehicles, this this is true care. Much of our Western medicine has the double wings. That's a catechus, but that's something else. It's more profit-oriented because it looks nicer. But this is true, that the true care as is also represented on the barbershop pole. So as we climb up in the higher consciousness and coming up out of the root chakra, out of the red, we come up in starting to share from the heart and the green pastures, or the land of milk and honey, if you will, that we put the guns and whatever our devices on the table and not do it again and do it again, as Steely Dan said in that song. So when I'm practicing the good things and giving what is within us, I see that the dead skin, or they call it defects, I see, my experience has been mostly that they fall off on their own. Making note in my house, the liabilities, of course, but I practice in being the best I can be, and that comes through being humble and being kind and gentle. And by the way, back to that gorilla, Coco the gorilla, was calibrated somehow. Dr. David Hawkins, through his calibration of levels of consciousness, and that we'll see here in a minute, that Coco the gorilla had the had the higher consciousness more than 85% of the people of humanity on this planet, simply by being gentle and kind and loving. So that we have some work to do, but it starts from somewhere, and that start happens from within us. How can we ever know anything outside of ourselves if we don't know what is within us? So this is a quick look at the 12 steps. We're not going to get into it in great detail, but I like to explain how it works and just give you a synopsis that as I have these crude lines drawn, that in step 11 it is shared that as in St. Francis' prayer, that we become channels of blessings, channels of truth, channels of what is, as we made our closer contact with, they term it God. You can, so many people have a trouble with that term, but it's simply, as Tesla says, this puts it simple, that if one wants to understand the universe, one song, then think vibration, frequency, energy. So as we practice the spiritual principles that are laid at our feet, the step 1 through 3, it unlocks the knot within us, that we can admit we were powerless over the devices, and we want to come to a higher, understand something better. That's the way I termed it, that there had to be a higher plane of existence, and I want to assure you there is, as in the Alcoholics Anonymous book, even in the fourth dimension, even in the fourth edition, it speaks of the fourth dimension, a higher place where you can see all the obstacles in the way. And a real quick look at, I'd like to make a note that as in step 10 comprises of both step 4 and 5. So we, in our personal inventory, as we practice the goods, we stock up on the goods in our houses of the holy, our warehouse, and we making note of the liabilities. And so that this step 4, I certainly see, and I think you can see quite easily that is making a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. In the beginning, I remember one counselor saying, "What do you have?" to the group, and I was more than a bit broken, but my voice has even been all but lost, that I could barely muster up the word hope. So that you can put in, and then we keep on practicing, having the courage, and we develop. We become stronger, and we can stand up, walking the line. And we'll look at that, what that means, the line, here in a little bit. But here's a little look at the 12th step, or the some of the principles that we can consciously practice in our lives. And from my experience through the surrender was in forgiveness of all the injustice, and that goes a two-way street. And the honesty means to thine own self be true. Here we see hope, and actions without faith is dead. Courage to do things I've never done before, as in practicing patience and tolerance with others, not simply reacting as the lower self or the animal instincts. So that even though that lower self, or the root chakras, is energy, we can harness that energy for good, not letting the self-will run riot, as it is said. So we can be willingness to receive a greater understanding, a bit of self-discipline, perseverance, keep on going. 12, that we have service. Give it away now. Keep what you got by giving it all away. Those Red Hot Chili Peppers and Ian Brown. Much of my speech is interlaced with lyrics of rock and roll. I say that if I would have listened and taken better note of the lyrics that I grew up with, maybe I might not have been in so much trouble in my life. But, however, I didn't listen much. I did what I wanted to do. So we'll continue this in a moment and look at some of the moral inventory that we can stockpile.